one of the challenges that I think for leaders in the past has been with this pandemic, they've realised there's a gap in communication. And so there was no real updates. They may have had with their own team, and by the way, it's revealed they weren't particularly that great with their own team, but let's leave that aside. Their own team was not doing enough regular updates to get, so everybody was working in their silos and assuming everything was going wrong and well and looking at the figures. Now what we're seeing is people realising they need to have more one-on-ones and more contact, and actually scorecards have started to mean more now. So how do we turn these updates into metrics that we can have a conversation about? And there's a lot more points of contact and a much more frequent contact, rather than those elongated meetings that didn't go anywhere. I think that has been a real shift that I've seen anyway, and that's what I would recommend if people aren't doing it, is have much more touch points and conversations on a more regular basis that is one-to-one with your teams rather than everybody in the same room. And I think Zoom has kind of helped that because it makes it a lot easier to do.
I also think Zoom has helped that because I think most people can tolerate a live meeting longer, whereas with Zoom at about the 45-minute mark, people go, let's wrap this up. Mm-hmm. And so you have to be a little more crisp with your meetings.
I'll tell you something else that Zoom's done too, you've given me that thought, is that it's been a lot easier to, rather than everybody looking at a screen, right, up there in the projector and fiddling with their phones and everything else, you do those one-on-ones, you share your screen, you've actually got an agenda and you walk through. It's a much more controlled and efficient meeting than it used to be. Mm-hmm. So that's been a big byproduct, productive byproduct and cultural byproduct, where it's done well.
Yeah, and I think I've heard of organizations that do frequent but shorter Zoom meetings. And they might have a couple scheduled. They don't do it they might have one a week that's our standard, we're doing this, but all the other ones have to have a reason. And you can't, they have some interesting rules. One company has a rule that says you can't schedule the meeting closer to an hour, within an hour of start time. It has to, you got to give people a chance to think, because if you're asking them to do something, give them some time to think about it. No meetings where you're introducing information for the first time. It has to be given to them in another form that they can look at it before they come to the meeting, because when they're in the meeting, we're going to discuss it, not read it to each other. Stuff like that. But that had started pre-pandemic and pre-Zoom with companies that say, we're going to have a 15-minute meeting with no chairs. We're just going to stand up, and when we're done, we're not going to go longer. And if we have to meet again later today, we will. So it's just getting real clear about, we're trying to get something done rather than just, how was your weekend?
There was something, you just triggered another thing. When talking to people, found out they'd gone into that meeting, back-to-back meeting syndrome on Zoom that they got away from, right? And then suddenly realized, we've not got that space in between to prepare, and so and some Zoom fatigue. So what I'm seeing again now is people having less, maybe 3 or 4 meetings a day than less than they used to, but actually doing some productivity in between them, or giving them homework. Right, before we get back together on this one, I don't know whether you've been at meetings where it's a shambles. There's no real action delivered, and everybody gets up and just wanders to the next meeting.
Yeah, they amble off
into the sunset.
Yeah, but I think it's something you touched on earlier, which is in some organizations that's a measure of your importance.
Yeah, it is that you're in a meeting.
They won't have a meeting without me, and it's like and then you get meetings with 112 people in them. And there's people who basically their job is to go to meetings. Mm-hmm. But if that's a cultural thing. If the culture is, if you're not in the meeting, then you're not important, or even worse, you're going to get all the to-do jobs. It's like, so I think Zoom, in a way, you could have more people on a Zoom call, but I think it's changed it in some ways for the better. Mm-hmm. But I kind of advocate that sort of hybrid method. So I think it's both and. Yeah. It's, do we do it this way or that way? Yes, both and.
Well, that's where we're going, isn't it? I think we're going to see a combination, whereas it didn't really exist before. So.
Yeah, I don't think there may be a little ricochet where people can't wait to get together in the meetings, but then I think it'll maybe ricochet back to Zoom. But in the end, it's whatever works. What works best for your company and what you're trying to do. I think there's a place for live. There's a place for Zoom, there's a place for recording, there's a place for everything. And given that most leaders vastly overestimate how well they communicate, they should use every method possible. I try and tell them, never change your message, but change the method. Same message all the time, whatever it is, your strategy, your goals, your, whatever you want. But, find different ways to deliver it so people listen and then kind of check in. Because you never know, I sometimes don't get things till the 5th time I hear it, or the 40th.
I'm in the 50s, I think.
Yeah. So then I'll just keep saying
Yeah,
the
just
same
keep saying
thing.